A few weeks ago, I showed you how to make this really cool looking fantasy style tree out of clump foliage, some hot glue, and a paper towel roll. This week, I want to jump into something a little bit more realistic that you could use in a diorama or for some scatter terrain in your next tabletop gaming session. And I'll show you how to do it this week on Tabletop Witchcraft. Hey there, and welcome back to Tabletop Witchcraft. This week, I want to jump into making some really nice looking trees that you could use in a diorama or for tabletop gaming. And I've always wanted to get into some other colors than just the standard green tree with the green foliage. And what better time than the fall to jump into some really nice fall trees. I made these out of some juniper branches, some clump foliage, and the bases are made out of foam with some other really nice fine little details. So if you're ready, let's go grab some supplies and let's get crafting. Alright, so the first thing I did was go on a hike with the family. We collected a whole bunch of juniper branches, brought them home, put them in the oven at 225 for about an hour and a half, and I did that to kill all the bacteria that might be growing on these branches. Now I had a certain look for this tree. I wanted a branch in this spot, so I'm just using a pin vise to drill a hole out. And we're going to add a little bit of super glue onto each end here, one for the branch and one on the main trunk of the tree. Insert a paper clip, and we're going to use that to pin and hold this branch to the main part of the tree. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of super glue on the tree itself. We're going to press and hold this really tight onto the tree, and then adding a little bit of super glue accelerant, it's going to cure it real quick. And don't worry about that discoloration right there. That will go away once it dries. Now, pruning this tree, don't be afraid to really cut some of these branches off. I'm going for an apple tree here with this build. So I really probably should have cut a lot more branches off than I did. So depending on the tree that you're going for, kind of have that in mind when you're cutting. This shape right here is going to be for the birch tree that we're making. So you can see it's a lot different shape. Now, to ensure that all the bark stays on this branch right here, it's very fine, we're going to wash the whole thing in a watered down PVA glue and water mixture. It's really thin, but it's going to do an excellent job holding all that natural bark in place. For the base of all these trees, we're going to use XPS foam. Carve this out however you'd like with an alpha knife, and then we're going to place some 1¼ to 1½ inch washers in the bottom of this, and that's to hold it upright, because once we add all the clump foliage, it is going to tend to get a little bit top heavy, but these washers will do a great job keeping it standing upright. Now I want to carve in a little bit of a cave entrance. I got a cool little detail I want to add to this base when I'm done, so you'll see exactly why I did this here in just a few minutes. And you can see how nice those fit in place. We're going to hold them in there with just a little bit of hot glue. And I believe I used 3 washers per base. Now, a neat little trick, you probably see me do this in other videos, add a little bit of hot glue over that hole. They're recessed maybe 1/8 inch down in there. Press it onto some parchment paper, and it gives you a really nice rubberized coating to hold those washers in. Now, to keep the trees in place, we're going to insert those in there with just a little bit of hot glue. And not all of the rock features that we're going to place on this have to actually be pebbles or real rocks. As you can see, obviously here, I'm using some foam for one of those. Then we're going to use a little bit of Mod Podge to seal the whole craft. And now we're going to add a little base underneath the foundation here for the tree. And I didn't place a piece of chipboard under the whole thing because I didn't want you to actually see the chipboard on all sides. So as you can see, we're just going to hot glue that little cutout piece of chipboard in place so you won't see it on the whole thing. Alright, now we finally get to add some paint to the craft. I want to do something a little bit different than the standard color stone. So we're going to base it in some slate gray. Then I used a sponge to damp on a little country twill. It's like a light tan or a light brown. And then we're going to use some warm white to go over all of the highlighted edges to dry brush it. Now I'm using a little bit of a burnt umber. That first bit had a little bit of white left in it. That's why it was so bright on the brush, but you're really not going to see much of this anyway. I decided to go ahead and put grass over all of this when I was done. But if you want to leave some areas dirt or mud, obviously you're going to want to make sure to do this step. And that's just a black wash, obviously, over the stone. Then finally, we go back to that warm white for one last final dry brush over the stone for some highlights. Alright, now for the birch tree, we're going to use, again, some warm white. And I'm going to sort of dab it over the whole thing. You don't have to paint the entire tree because birch trees do have some darker spots on them. And then I did a dry brush of ivory white over the tree. Now if you notice on birch trees, they have a lot of these black spots on them. And they sort of look like upside down cups or U's, right? So just use a Sharpie and literally it's very easy, just draw them on. Not everything always has to be done with acrylic paint. So you want some larger dark spots and then you want a bunch of smaller little, almost like little straight lines as you can see here. And you're going to coat the entire tree with this method. Okay, so if you've seen my fence video, you might remember these little tiny pinheads here. I saved all of these. I never knew what I would need them for. I knew the day would come, and here it is. We're going to paint all of these some red color, and we're going to turn these into apples for our apple tree. This is some polyfiber. You've seen this in my last tree video. And we're going to use this in little clumps on all the branches. You don't want to take one large chunk and put it on there because it's going to look like this big ball of clump foliage when you're done. Break this up into some smaller bunches as I'm doing here. Glue them in place. Then add your clump foliage just to those certain sections. And it'll add a lot of character to the tree. And I absolutely love the bend in this tree. I have an old hiking area that I used to do with my father, and it was lined, this old tote road was just lined with birch trees, and they were all bent over just like this, and we actually nicknamed the trail the Bending Birches, so I thought that was kind of cool. I really had a lot of memories of that while doing this build. Now this clump foliage right here, awesome. I'll put a link in the description below to Merrimack Valley Models where you can pick this up. And some of these items I didn't end up using in the video, but would also be great to add over all of your clump foliage when you're done. Alright, now we're going to do a little bit of tacky glue and water. This is going to be the mixture that we're going to use to hold all the clump foliage in place on top of the polyfiber. I can't stress enough how important it is to use the least amount of water possible when doing this. The best way to know if you have the right amount of water is if the glue mixture does not go into the polyfiber when you brush it on. Right here you can see I used a little too much water and I was having a bit of a problem with the clump foliage sticking to the polyfiber. It's too watery and it won't stick. As you can see here, that's the correct mixture. You can see it's sitting on top of the polyfiber. It's not going into it, and you can see how the clump foliage is just sticking right to the tree there. You can even see that one little piece dangling at the bottom. It's stuck by just one little piece of polyfiber. So it will hold really well, just don't thin it down too much. Okay, so we used a little bit of a lighter clump foliage on the top. On the bottom now, we're going to use a little bit of a darker green. And I probably would have mixed a little bit of this darker green into the top as well, looking back at it. Okay, I know this looks a little bit of a mess right here, but you want to get it to this point. let it dry, then you can go back a second time or even a third and keep just filling in those holes, as it dries, and it'll fill in real nice. Now here are the pinheads that we painted red. We're going to place those around the tree, and they look just like apples. Alright, onto the base here. I feel like a lot of times the bases on trees are overlooked. A lot of people put so much time into the tree itself that they forget that the base is, a really important part of the build. A lot of people look at that as well, right? So we're going to coat this in some grass. I'm using some purple. I ended up using some red flowers too. I tried to go with some more fall colors. I didn't use the brighter green. I used the darker green grass that I had here. I tried to get some brown grass to mix into this, but it didn't come in time. But you can definitely do that as well. My wife also pointed out I should have put some leaves on the base. Good call. I could have definitely put some dried leaves down there too. Alright, now we're going to go and take these two models right here. I don't know what that one is on the left. It's like a little, ferret or something, and the one on the right is a rabbit. We paint these up, and we're going to place these onto the bases as well. Okay, so I made a little hole in this one base, and we're just going to stick this guy right on there with a little bit of super glue. Now, this actually turned out really well. I was really happy with the way this looked. It's a little bit of pigment. I used a lighter tan and a dark brown. I mixed them together. And now I'm just going to touch a little bit of pigment fixture to it. And it sort of like washed it away a little bit. But then I just went back with a little bit more pigment while the pigment fixer was wet, sprinkled it on top, and it looked really awesome. Alright, now the same for the rabbit. I'm going to hold him in place with some super glue. I used a little bit of Vallejo thick mud to hold him in place as well. And as you can see the grass, I used a little bit of watered down glue mixture to help hold all that in place as well. And then I felt like the entrance here needed a little something extra, so I placed a grass tuft right here in the corner. So while I was searching the internet, trying to find the clump foliage I wanted to use in this video, I was having a bit of a hard time. I knew I wanted to use the Woodland Scenics clump foliage. It looked good in the last video, and I wanted to use it here, but I couldn't find it in these fall colors. I happened to stumble across Merrimack Valley Models. That website had a ton of different things you could pick from, including all the clump foliage that I wanted for this video. I called up the owner to make sure the stuff would arrive on time, Michael Bond, and he was nice enough to offer a 5% discount to anybody watching until November 20th. The discount code is Tabletop Scenery. I'll put a link in the description below. Now, this got me in the mood for a bunch of Halloween themed builds, so we'll have a couple of weeks of those coming up with Halloween just around the corner, along with that epic build, which might fall into that category. I don't know. You're just going to have to wait and see. Also, please consider joining me on Patreon. I've got a bunch of different tiers over there. One of them, the Coven, has a new edition where we're going to be doing craft-offs there, where the winner will receive a special gift from me. Alright, until next time, I'll see you around.